Thursday's broadcast of the Gospel Truth. This week I've started sharing on humility being the path to more grace. And that's taken from James chapter 4 verse 6, 1 Peter chapter 5. And I've shared a lot already. I tell you, the first 3 days of this week has just been powerful. And if you've missed this, please go to our website or request the materials you need to get hold of this teaching. Before I get right back into the teaching, let me just make mention that today is our National Day of Prayer. And you know, I pray every day. I pray all day, every day. It's not like I just have one day that I pray. But I do believe that it is a godly thing for our nation to recognize our dependence upon God and for us to specifically humble ourselves and pray. 2 Chronicles 7:14, if my people, which are called by my name, will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and forgive their sins and heal their lands. Notice that humility, that's what I'm teaching on, it's a part of prayer. And yet some people have used prayer to where they use it as a bragging right. I've had people come to me before and say, how much do you pray every day? And the reason they wanted to know is so that they could compare themselves with me. Hopefully they'd come out ahead and they would look better and feel better about themselves. And yet that's not true prayer. You know, Jesus said, don't be like the hypocrites, because they love to pray, standing in the synagogues and on the street corners that they can receive glory of men. But he said hypocrites love to pray. Did you know that prayer is not all good? All religions pray, and yet they pray to demon gods. Do you know that the jihadists, they pray? They pray 5 times a day, and yet they're out killing people and doing things. Prayer in itself is not the thing. It's about humbling yourself and recognizing your dependence upon God. And before I get back into today's teaching, I just want to relate this to humility and saying that we need to humble ourselves, recognize that we need God in our life. We need His wisdom. We need God in this nation. And I encourage you today to join with all other believers all over this nation and just pray and ask God for His mercy and His goodness on this nation. I believe that it's all available to us through Jesus. He's already provided it, but we do have to reach out and by faith receive the goodness and the mercy that He desires to give this nation. And so I just agree with all of the other people in the United States that today are praying and thanking God for this nation. I believe that our best days are ahead. I believe that right now we are in a crisis situation. I believe we're at a turning point, but I'm not pessimistic. I really believe that things are turning around. And you know, we've got a number of things. I've got this declaration of dependence upon God and His Holy Bible that I'm promoting and putting out, and I believe it's going to make a difference. And I know that other people are doing things. God is raising up people from every walk of life, and praise God, I just agree with you that God is turning our nation around, especially during this election year. It is absolutely critical. You know, the appointment of a new Supreme Court justice, man, we need to be praying and believing God that we're going to get godly people in. Righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. So I've been teaching on humility, and man, I've already covered a lot of awesome things. Let me turn to Matthew chapter 16, verse 24 through 25. Jesus had just rebuked Peter and said, "Get thee behind me, Satan." And yet most people would think, well, what did Peter say wrong? He was just concerned about Jesus. Jesus had talked about being rejected and killed, and he says, oh no, that'll never happen. We'll protect you. You know what that was? That was pride. That was exalting his opinion and preserving self. Even though his love for Jesus, nobody would have wanted to see him suffer. It was God's will for that. He was born to die. And Jesus recognized this as Satan speaking through Peter, because anytime you get to promoting self at the expense of what God's will for you is, then that's pride, and that is demonic, and it's Satan. And he turned around and said, get behind me, Satan, because you are an offense unto me. You savor not the things that be of God, but those that be of men. So I believe that you could say that savoring the things that be of man, in other words, loving and longing for just what other people want, but not wanting what God wants for you, That's pride. Anytime you promote and exalt your own will for yourself above what God's will is, that's pride. And it originated with the devil, and you are speaking and being motivated by the devil when you are just promoting yourself. Man, did you know that probably a lot of the people watching this program, they have a heart for God, and they will humble themselves and they'll receive that and receive benefit. But if I was to just put this on a secular television statement and make that statement, I guarantee you, man, I would be persecuted mercilessly, because this is completely contrary to our culture today. Man, it's all about self. It's all about promotion of self. Step on anybody, do whatever it takes, exalt yourself. We have these minorities today that are just a very fraction of 1% of the population, and yet they're making the entire population accommodate them, because it's all about self. They'll shut down businesses. They'll do anything, because self is all important. Man, that's just wrong, wrong, wrong. So right after he said this to Peter, in the very next verse, Matthew 16:24, it says, "Then said Jesus unto his disciples, If any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it." Do you realize that this attitude that Jesus is expressing right here is repulsive to the vast majority of people, even most Christians? Most Christians are out to get all they can, and then can all they get, and then sit on their can. It's all about taking care of them. It's all about promotion of self. How much can I get? And how can I excel above this person and stuff? And this thing about putting God first and denying yourself and taking up your cross. You know what a cross is? A cross is something you die on. In other words, you die to yourself and you put God and other people and the purpose that God has for your life above your own personal comfort. Man, that is rare today, even among ministers. I went to a place one time in Toledo, Ohio. I had been there before and I had a good meeting, and so the pastor invited me back. But when I went back the second time, it was strange. He picked me up in this rented car that was just special. And then he took me, my wife, and my two boys, they were young at the time, and he took us to a hotel that was a different hotel than we stayed in before. And he put us in a suite, and he had ice chests there with sodas and all kinds of things, water. He had gifts for the kids. He waited on us just hand and foot. It was way, way, way over the top. And then when we went out to eat during the meetings, he would take us to these places that were very expensive places to eat. And he would say, "Where do you want to go today?" And I remember we were going by McDonald's, and my kids said, "Well, let's go to McDonald's." He said, "Oh no, I could never take you there." Anyway, he was strange. He was also distant, and he wasn't friendly to me the way he had been before. And anyway, towards the end of that week of meetings, this man finally came to me and I apologized. He says, "I'm sorry for the way I've been treating you this week." He says, "We had another minister come in not long before I got there, and he said, this guy criticized me over the fact that I just picked him up in my family car, that I didn't rent a limo for him. He checked out of the hotel I put him in and went and got another hotel room and got a suite. He demanded that I give him fruit and drinks and things like this. He said that he would not eat in any place that was less than $25 per person." And this has been 30, 40 years ago. I mean, that would probably be the equivalent of like $40 or $50 per person today. And he just made all of these demands. And this pastor was so put out that he said, "I'll never have another guest minister again." And the only reason that he had me in is because he had already scheduled it. And so I was going to be the last one. But he was afraid that I really wanted all of these things, and so he just went overboard. And I told him, I said, "Look, it's just fine. I don't mind riding in your car. I don't mind eating at McDonald's. I don't mind staying in a hotel that isn't a suite. and things like this. But you know what? There are some ministers that just somehow or another have an inflated opinion of themselves and think that they demand all of this. Now, you know what? I enjoy it. I have some of the places I go, people do put me in really nice rooms, and I'm not against that. I'm not saying it's wrong to do that. But I'm saying to demand it and to think that somehow or another everybody is here to serve you and that they ought to just fall down and worship you when you walk into the room. That's pride. And that doesn't matter if it's in a minister. It doesn't matter who it's in. You know what? The world does not owe you anything. People do not owe you anything. There's a lot of people that go through life with a chip on their shoulder just thinking that everybody owes me something. You know what? You have to earn people's respect. Over in 1 Timothy chapter 4, Paul was writing to Timothy, and Timothy was the head of the church at Ephesus, which some people estimate to be as many as 50,000 to 100,000 people. And Paul told him, he says, don't let any man despise your youth. Did you know Paul's the one that started that church? Those people were his converts. He could have written to them and said, don't despise Timothy. But instead, he told Timothy, don't let them despise you. And then he says, but be an example in word and conversation and faith and purity. And he lists all of these things. In other words, what he's basically telling Timothy is, Timothy, earn their respect. Don't let people despise you. You have to earn this. And yet there's a lot of people that think, no, everybody has to just automatically give me respect. That's wrong. You have to earn people's respect. And if you go through life with a chip on your shoulder and every time somebody doesn't do something, you get offended and stuff, it's because you're just full of pride. You have not denied yourself. You have not taken up your cross. You are still thinking that you're the center of the universe. And it says, whosoever will save his life shall lose it, and whosoever will lose his life for my sake shall find it. Let me ask you this. Do you feel like you're losing your life? Do you feel like everything's falling apart? Things aren't going well? Have you ever considered that maybe it's because you've never yielded your life and turned the control over to God, and it's because you are out to promote yourself? You're only thinking about yourself. That is a recipe for disaster. To the natural mind, it looks like that if I don't promote myself, if I don't take care of myself, if I don't defend myself, who will? And to the natural mind, it looks like that's a recipe for failure. But it's really just the opposite. When you promote yourself, God will not promote you. Psalms chapter 75 verse 6 says, promotion doesn't come from the east or from the west or from the south. But it's the Lord that sets up one and puts down another. God will protect you. God will defend you if you will not do it yourself. Let me turn over and read these verses out of Ephesians chapter 6. And this is Paul speaking, but he's speaking under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. And here's what he says, servants, be obedient to them that are your masters. You know, today, this isn't talking about just like a servant that works for somebody. This is talking about slaves with their masters. And it says, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling in singleness of your heart as unto Christ. Did you know a self-centered, proudful, arrogant person today would say that anybody who's a slave, you ought to hate your master. You ought to hate the fact that you are somebody's property. Well, I will agree that this is never God's will. And I'm not going to teach on that right now. But Paul is saying that you serve them. Be obedient. Have a good attitude. Did you know people who are just selfish and self-promoting would never do this? They would hate their master every moment of every day. That's contrary to the instructions that Paul was giving. And then he says, not with eye service as men pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. In other words, don't just do right and obey when they're looking, but you obey all of the time. And do it as unto the Lord. Did you know most people can't even think this way? When they go to a job, they aren't working for the Lord. They're working for that person. And if the person isn't looking, they'll goof off. If they get a 10-minute break, they'll take 15 minutes, and then they'll go to the restroom after the break so that extends it to 20 minutes, and they'll get double, and they'll take things home. They'll never miss this pen. They'll never miss this pencil. They'll never miss these things. And you know what? They're just doing what they can get by with, not realizing that God is looking. at every single thing. Whether the boss knows that you came in late and left early, or whether you took this, or whether you extended your break, whether the boss ever knows that or not, God knows it. And the Lord is saying, do your job heartily as unto the Lord and not unto men. And then He goes on to say, not with eye service as man pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart, with good will doing service as to the Lord and not to man, knowing that whatsoever good thing any man doeth, the same shall he receive of the Lord, whether he be bond or free. In other words, we should lose our life like this is talking about. We shouldn't be working for people. We shouldn't be just doing things for the praise and the acceptance of people. We ought to give our life to the Lord and say, God, I'm going to serve you. Whether I ever get credit, recognition from men or not, God will reward you. That's what He's saying. Knowing that whatsoever good thing any man doeth, the same shall he receive of the Lord, whether he be bond or free. Whether you're the CEO or whether you're the janitor, the lowest paid position, God is looking at you. And we need to lose our life and not look for our recognition and acceptance from people, but we need to look from God. And if we would do that, that's turning our life over. That's dying to ourselves. That's taking up our cross and saying, God, I'm going to serve you. And if you would do that, you will be blessed by God. You know, I've got an example of the CEO of our ministry, and I'm not going to give his whole testimony because I'd probably mess up some of the details. But the gist of it is that he was coming up with ideas, working for a person, and his boss would take his ideas, present it to his boss as his idea, and get credit for it. And Paul Milligan, the CEO of our ministry, was not getting credit and not getting recognition. Did you know that most people, that would be a justification for them quitting or them being angry or bitter or whatever? But Paul did the exact thing here. He lost his life. He was serving the Lord, knowing that whatsoever good thing he did, God would eventually reward him. And so for a number of years, Paul knew that this guy was taking credit for his ideas, and yet he says, I'm going to make this man the best supervisor, and I'm just going to do these things. I'm doing it heartily as unto the Lord and not unto man. And he didn't get bitter, and he didn't fight against him, and he didn't criticize or anything. He just kept doing his job in an excellent way, and his boss was getting all of the credit for years. Did you know a proud person couldn't do that? But eventually, I don't know exactly what the relationship was, but the guy who was over his boss came to him one day and he says, was this your idea? Was this your idea? And Paul, when he was asked, said, yes, I'm the one that came up with that. And he said, well, we thought so. He says, because your boss has been taking credit for all of this, and yet we knew that he wasn't smart enough to do this, and so we got to looking and we figured out it was you. And anyway, they promoted Paul, and Paul became the boss over the man who had been stealing his ideas and all of these things. God promoted him. You know why? Because he didn't promote himself. I'm telling you, this idea that somehow or another there isn't a God who's going to defend you, and God won't bless you, and you've got to take care of yourself, and you got to stab somebody in the back, and you got to manipulate, massage the truth, and present things in the most favorable light to you, and maybe, criticize somebody else. That whole logic, that whole way of thinking is all pride and arrogance. And it's wrong. And God resists the proud. There are some of you that the very reason you haven't been promoted is because you are operating in pride. You are depending upon yourself. You've criticized others. The Scripture didn't say you shall not lie in Exodus chapter 20. It says you shall not bear false witness. There's a difference. You could actually take statistics. You could actually say things that are true, but present them without the other things that would have given a different opinion, and you have borne false witness. There are people that when you're a salesman, you go out and you say, here's our product, and our product is this and this and this, and you may not have said anything that was a lie, but you didn't compare it properly. You compared your best things with the competitor's worst things, and if the whole was taken together, you know what, your product wouldn't have been near as appealing to the people. You bore false witness. And we can do that when we are talking about other people, just presenting one side of the story, not telling the whole thing. And that violates the command in the Ten Commandments of thou shalt not bear false witness. And it's all rooted in pride, because you feel like if the truth was known, if everything came out, maybe you wouldn't do as well, and so you have to manipulate, you have to exaggerate. You know what that is? That's pride. And many people wouldn't even think that's pride, but that's exactly what it is. The very fact that you just constantly misrepresent things, exaggerate, it's all pride. You don't feel like that you could win with just nothing but the truth. You don't see God as the one who protects you and promotes you. But just like Jesus said, you have to deny yourself, take up your cross to follow Him. And if you save your life, you lose it. If you lose your life for His sake, you will find it. You will be more blessed. You'll sleep better at night. God will be your source. If the market fluctuates, if the financial markets fluctuate, if anything fluctuates, God is just the same. And as long as you are looking to Him and you're relying upon Him, then you'll prosper regardless of what's going on. Boy, these are just amazing, amazing things that I'm saying that are so counter to our culture today. And I want to encourage you to, again, take a look at this, and you need to learn humility. You need to humble yourself. You can't just pray and ask God to humble you. He said you humble yourself. You take these things, you begin to exalt God and exalt His purpose for your life and exalt other people more than you exalt yourself. That's humility. You begin to start getting something that's bigger than you. You need something that's bigger than you. And you know what? I love God, and my whole life is about Him. It's not about me and what I have. And it's about doing what He calls me to do. And because of that, man, I am a secure person. I'm not afraid of people's criticism and rejection, because the only person I'm out to please is God. I've lost my life to Him, and I've found it. I encourage you to do the same thing. I promise you that this is a better way. You know, I've got this brand new teaching entitled Humility, God's Path to More Grace. And I tell you, these are things that you aren't going to hear very often. Our world, even our Christian world, still is a lot about just selfishness and promoting themselves and how to get all of these things. Did you know you could actually take the full gospel and it feeds right into a selfish person, because, man, now you can be healed, you can be prospered, you can have joy and peace and all of these things. And even though those things are available, and it is true that God does want to bless us, those are not the reason for serving God. You serve God because He's God and you aren't. And as you humble yourself, He gives you more grace, and all of these things come as a byproduct, not the goal.